He had no idea the officer standing 10 feet away was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. And she had no idea the man she was about to strike was someone whose calm silence had toppled bigger monsters than her. What happened inside Courtroom 4C that morning would not only shatter one woman's carefully protected reputation, it would crack open a system that had been hiding its rot for years. It started with a single moment, a moment no one expected, a moment that changed everything. Officer Dana Holt walked into the Jackson County Courthouse as if the world belonged to her. Shoulders squared, chin high, a presence sharp enough to slice through the air. For nearly 13 years, she had built a reputation that made rookies stiffen and veterans step aside. Some admired her confidence. Others whispered that it wasn't confidence at all. It was something darker, something she had learned to use like a weapon. That morning, she was supposed to testify in a minor possession case. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated, just another routine hearing. But Dana never made it to the witness stand. As she stepped into courtroom 4C, her eyes locked onto a black man in a navy blue suit standing near the witness box. He spoke quietly with one of the attorneys. Calm, comfortable, focused. Everything about him irritated her. Something in her tightened. She didn't pause. She didn't think. She marched straight toward him with the certainty of someone who believed nobody would ever question her choices. Then she struck him, a sharp, open-handed slap that cracked through the courtroom like something breaking. The kind of sound that makes people freeze before their minds catch up. Chairs stopped creaking. Papers stopped fluttering. Even the defendant, waiting nervously in the front row, went rigid like a statue. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The man did not stagger, did not yell, did not react the way anyone expected. Instead, he adjusted his jacket, brushed his cheek with the back of his hand, looked Dana directly in the eyes. My name is Judge Marcus Reed, he said in a steady voice, and I am the one presiding over this courtroom today. The silence that followed felt heavier than the strike itself. The kind of silence that settles on a room when people realize they have just witnessed the line being crossed, not by inches but by miles. Dana blinked, her confidence crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. Her throat bobbed. No words formed. She tried to swallow the panic creeping up her spine, but it was already too late. Phones rose in the air as quietly as hands in prayer. A public defender near the jury box tapped her screen to start recording. 2 more in the gallery followed instinctively. A single slap had turned into a fire that was already spreading. Judge Reed didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He didn't demand anything. He simply turned to the courtroom and said, "We will take a 15-minute recess." Then he stepped into his chambers with the calmness of someone who knew storms better than most people knew sunlight. No one moved. Not at first. People weren't sure whether they should rise, sit, or wait for someone else to make the first decision. The bailiff shifted uneasily. The prosecutor stared at Dana like he was watching someone fall downstairs in slow motion. One of the attorneys leaned toward her and whispered, "You just assaulted a judge." The words hit her like cold water. She inhaled sharply, as if waking from a fog she didn't remember walking into. She looked around and saw faces she had intimidated for years, now staring back without fear, without hesitation, without the respect she had always forced out of them. News traveled faster than she could think. Court interns slipped into the hallway with shaking hands. Reporters waiting downstairs received frantic messages. Within an hour, the clip of the slap was everywhere online. Unedited, unpolished, raw. Comments exploded. Truths resurfaced. People who once stayed quiet suddenly found their voices again. But before the world could dissect what the video meant, one question grew louder than the clip itself. Who exactly was Officer Dana Holt? And how had she become the kind of woman who could walk into a courtroom and slap a stranger without hesitation? Because before the strike, before the silence, before the cameras captured her downfall, Dana Holt had built something. A reputation, a legacy, an identity she believed was untouchable. And she believed it because, for years, the system had treated her that way. But now the system she trusted was about to turn on her. Not all at once, not in a single moment, but piece by piece, like a tower losing the bricks at its base. The truth was coming. Not quietly, not politely, but with the force of every voice she had ever silenced. This is where her empire begins to crack. And it all starts with the past she never thought would surface. Begins with a shift that had been building for years, long before the slap turned Dana Holt's world upside down. People inside the Maplewood Police Department used to joke that Dana didn't climb the ranks. She bulldozed her way up. Fresh out of the academy in her early 20s, she moved through patrol shifts with a confidence that didn't come from experience, but from instinct. She figured out early which supervisors liked officers who acted tough and which ones didn't read reports too carefully. She understood who held real power and who only pretended. She watched, she learned, and she pushed boundaries 1 inch at a time until people stopped seeing the boundary at all. At first, her actions were small enough to ignore. A traffic stop that went an hour longer than necessary. A warning that somehow turned into a citation. A teenager who said he was searched without reason. His mother filed a complaint. It was dismissed as a misunderstanding. No one followed up. Dana kept moving. Then came the incident everyone inside the department whispered about, but no one dared mention on paper. A young black teacher named Raymond was standing outside a grocery store waiting for his rideshare. Dana pulled up and asked why he was hanging around. He explained patiently. She told him his tone felt disrespectful. He recorded the interaction with shaky hands. The video might have reached the local news if it hadn't vanished from the records room within a week. Dana called it a clerical error. People nodded and moved on. Some officers said she acted like someone trying to impress a ghost audience, as if she believed an invisible group of supporters applauded her every aggressive decision. Others thought she simply liked the feeling of control. But whatever the reason, she built a reputation that grew heavier year after year. And instead of being checked, she was rewarded. Commendations appeared in her personnel file. Her name was mentioned in press releases. She was assigned to units that gave her more independence and less oversight. A few supervisors raised gentle concerns. They were transferred or reassigned. The message spread fast. If you questioned Dana, you inconvenienced yourself. There was one officer, a quiet man named Adam Briggs, who tried to sound the alarm early. He had been paired with her for a month. After watching her escalate a harmless encounter with a teenage girl outside a library, he wrote a detailed report describing unnecessary force. He submitted it. 2 weeks later, he was reassigned to night patrol on the edge of the county, far from a station where he had worked for 8 years. Dana received a note of appreciation for maintaining order in challenged neighborhoods. But the cracks were forming even then. Dana didn't see them because she never looked back. She didn't notice the officers who avoided riding with her. She didn't notice the families who crossed the street to avoid her cruiser. She didn't notice the defendants whose cases were quietly dismissed after attorneys spotted inconsistencies in her reports. She didn't notice because the department shielded her. Not out of loyalty, but because acknowledging the problem meant admitting they had allowed it to grow. Dana thrived in that gap, the space where accountability should have lived. Every complaint stamped as unsubstantiated made her more confident that she could do whatever she wanted. She learned which lines were safe to cross. She learned which people wouldn't be believed. She learned that silence protects power better than any written rule. And she believed deeply that she was untouchable, until the day someone new arrived. His name was Judge Marcus Reed, and unlike most people who crossed her path, he did not carry fear in his voice. He carried something she had never learned how to handle. He carried boundaries. Reed had been appointed to the county bench 2 years before the slap. Quiet, steady, widely respected. He spoke carefully, never rushed a sentence, never acted above anyone. People trusted him because he made decisions with the patience of someone who understood the weight behind every ruling. He grew up in Lincoln Heights, a neighborhood where people rarely got second chances. He earned scholarships, worked nights through community college, and became a public defender before switching to prosecution. He saw the system from both sides, and that shaped him. Dana encountered him twice before the slap, though she pretended not to remember. The first time had been during a hearing where her report was thrown out due to inconsistencies she brushed off as minor details. Reed didn't raise his voice. He simply explained why accuracy mattered. She rolled her eyes. The second time was during a traffic case involving a teenager she had arrested for resisting. Reed read the footage. He dismissed the charges. He told her afterward in a calm voice that the law was not a tool for winning arguments. She walked away without responding. She considered him soft, someone who didn't understand the pressure officers faced. She misread him completely, and that misreading was the seed of everything that came later. The morning of the slap, she wasn't thinking about Reed at all. She had been irritated about the caseload, irritated about being asked to testify in a situation she thought was beneath her, irritated by a man she had argued with the night before. She walked into courtroom 4C with an anger she hadn't named but carried anyway. She saw a black man standing confidently near the witness box, and her mind connected dots she never examined. She acted before she thought. She followed the same reflex that had guided far too many of her decisions. The reflex that had gone unchecked for more than a decade. The reflex that now had an audience of millions. As the video spread online, people began sharing their own encounters. Some wrote long posts describing moments they thought they had imagined. Others recalled traffic stops that felt unsettling but never escalated. A former clerk from the records room messaged her friend, saying she remembered complaints that mysteriously disappeared. An old neighbor wrote about an argument overheard late one night between Dana and a struggling mother from down the street. The comments grew. The stories multiplied. By noon the next day, people who had never met were connecting their experiences. They pieced together a pattern that officials had ignored for years. It wasn't a new problem. It was an old one exposed under bright lights. But while the public began to understand who Dana had been all along, one question hung above everything. How would Judge Marcus Reed respond? He had always been measured, always patient, always careful. But patience has edges. And this time, the whole county waited to see where his edges were. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He didn't hold press conferences or release angry statements. He did what he had always done. He waited for the truth to take shape on its own. And while he waited, the foundations under Dana's feet continued to shift. Not because he pushed them, but because the system had finally run out of places to hide her. The moment that would change everything was still ahead. A confrontation that would not rely on shouting or accusations. A confrontation built on something far stronger. A record, a voice, a room full of people no longer afraid to speak. Part 3 will move directly into the intensifying fallout, the widening investigation, the collapse of Dana's support network, and the moment when Judge Reed's quiet resolve forces the entire system to face itself. Picked up speed faster than anyone expected. The slap had broken the skin of a system that had been stretched thin for years, and the first people to feel the pressure were the officers who worked closest to Dana Holt. They walked into the station with hesitant steps, speaking in lowered voices, glancing toward closed office doors as if expecting someone to listen. Some pretended nothing had changed. Others knew everything had. The chief held a short meeting behind glass walls that morning. The blinds were half closed, but everyone in the hallway could see the tension. No one came out smiling. A memo circulated by noon, requesting interviews from officers who had ever been partnered with Dana or supervised her. The request was written in polite language, but everyone understood the weight. The questions were no longer going away. The department could not bury them without burying itself. A few officers hesitated at first. Then the dam broke. One by one, people stepped forward, some quietly, some with shaking hands, some with a relief they hadn't allowed themselves to feel until that moment. They shared stories they had kept locked away. Incidents they convinced themselves were isolated. Arguments Dana had dismissed as jokes. Complaints they knew would be ignored. Some officers gave their names. Others chose to remain anonymous. All of them carried a piece of a puzzle they never thought would be assembled. The first major statement came from an officer named Carla Webb. She had left the department 3 years earlier and worked for a neighboring county now. She returned with a simple sentence that cut through the room. She said, "I stayed quiet because speaking up felt like stepping into traffic." Then she explained how Dana threatened to report her for insubordination when she questioned an arrest. She described a moment during a late shift when Dana bragged that she could get anyone reassigned if she wanted. Carla walked out of the station after giving her statement and called her husband from the parking lot. She cried for the first time about something she had lived through years before. Then came a younger officer, Tom Garland. He was shaking as he spoke, trying to steady his breath. He described a night where Dana stopped 3 drivers on the same road within half an hour. All black, all confused, none cited for anything specific. He said he wrote a report afterward, but the paperwork he submitted vanished from the system. He had assumed he made a mistake. He realized now that he had not. The investigation widened. Internal affairs reopened old files, some long forgotten, others shelved without explanation. They found patterns in Dana's reports. Repeated language. Identical phrasing used in dozens of unrelated cases. Vague justifications. Contradictions. They noticed the same neighborhoods targeted over and over. The same types of stops. The same outcomes. It didn't take long before the pattern became undeniable. Meanwhile, the world outside the station kept watching. Local news anchors updated viewers every hour. Social media amplified every detail. People dug up old footage, old articles, old rumors. The officer who once walked with her shoulders back and her chin lifted now found her name attached to stories she could not control. The public was no longer treating her like a mystery. They were treating her like a symbol. But the person who stayed silent through all of it was Judge Marcus Reed. He carried himself the same way he always did. Calm, steady, focused. People asked him for comments. He declined, not out of fear or strategy. He simply believed the truth did not need a spokesperson. Inside his chambers, he worked through the docket quietly. His clerk, Daniel, watched him with concern. He had known the judge for years and could read him easily. But today he saw something different. Not anger, not stress. Something deeper, something heavier. Like a man forced to relive every moment he had ever been underestimated and refusing to let any emotion overshadow the work in front of him. Daniel finally spoke. You don't have to stay this calm. Reed closed the file gently. I know. Most people would be furious, Daniel said. Reed folded his hands and looked at him. Fury is loud. It burns fast. It changes little. Daniel lowered his voice. And what do you want to change? Reed's eyes softened, but his answer carried weight. The parts of his place that forgot who they serve. He returned to his work, but the quiet in the room felt charged, like something beneath the surface was shifting. Outside, the county administration held an emergency meeting. Representatives from the district attorney's office, the sheriff's department, and the county council gathered in a private conference room. They reviewed the footage. They reviewed the officer's history. They discussed the growing pressure from the public. They realized the investigation was not only necessary, but unavoidable. Some of them felt uneasy about the attention. Others saw it as overdue. All of them understood that the days of protecting Dana Holt were over. Meanwhile, the recording of the slap reached national platforms. Podcasts debated it. Community groups analyzed it. Former defendants spoke up. One woman described being pulled from her car for asking a question. A college student wrote about a stop that left him shaken but too scared to speak out. Parents worried Dana had handled their children unfairly. Teachers remembered incidents that didn't feel right until now. Each voice added a new crack in the story Dana had created about herself. Each voice added pressure the department could no longer deflect. And all of that pressure was building toward a moment that would force everyone involved to stand in one room and face the truth without filters. While the investigation grew, Dana isolated herself. She barely left her house. The blinds stayed shut. Her phone filled with messages she didn't open. Her daughter, Mia, sent a single line asking why her mother had done something like that in a courtroom. Dana wrote a reply she never sent. In the rare moments she let her thoughts settle, she felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not fear, something deeper. She felt the loss of the control she had taken for granted for years. It slipped away faster than she could grab it. The authority she once wore like a second skin now felt thin enough to tear. And as the days passed, one truth became harder for her to deny. The fallout wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. A decision had been made without anyone saying it out loud. The county was preparing for something big, something public, something Dana could not talk her way out of. The hearing was coming, and her world was about to shrink to a single room where every voice she once silenced would finally be heard. Part 4 continues with the public hearing, the testimonies that reshaped the entire county, the quiet power of Judge Reed, and the moment Dana Holt's career ends in front of everyone. Began on a morning that felt heavier than the sky. The county had announced the public hearing 3 days earlier, and by then the entire community knew it would not be a routine review. People lined up outside the Maplewood Municipal Hall long before the doors opened. Some came out of anger, some out of curiosity. Some carried their own quiet memories of past encounters that suddenly felt relevant. Dana Holt arrived wearing a plain black coat that made her look smaller than she once seemed. She moved through a side entrance with her new attorney, a young man named Paul who had taken the case because no one else would touch it. Dana kept her eyes down as she walked, but she could still feel the weight of people staring. Not with fear, not with respect, just with a blunt kind of attention that made her realize she was stepping into a room she no longer controlled. Inside, the hall was already 3/4 full. Judges, lawyers, reporters, community advocates, former defendants, and residents from neighborhoods she had patrolled. They all waited in rows of metal chairs arranged in straight lines that gave the room the feeling of a quiet storm gathering strength. Judge Marcus Reed sat in the second row, dressed in a simple gray suit. He wasn't elevated above anyone. He didn't have security around him or any sign of authority displayed. He sat with his hands folded, eyes steady, as if he was there to observe, not to influence. His presence alone shifted the air in the room. People noticed him, but he didn't look at anyone except the front of the hall. Dana saw him from the corner of her eye. Something inside her tightened. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger either. It was the sudden realization that her decisions had collided with someone who would not bend or break the way others had. The review board walked in, forming a line behind a long table at the front. They represented different corners of the community. A retired detective, a former district attorney, a school principal, a pastor, a civil rights advocate, a judge from a neighboring district. They carried different stories, different values, different wounds. But today they had one responsibility: to decide whether Dana Holt should ever wear a badge again. People settled into silence as the chairperson, a woman named Ruth Carter, began the hearing. Her voice cut through the room with calm authority. She read a short statement explaining why the board had assembled and why the hearing was public. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The gravity of the moment carried itself. They began by playing the footage. The slap echoed faintly from the speakers, and the room tensed as if hearing it for the first time. The strike, the silence, the judge's calm words. Reed never changed expression while the clip played. He watched it the same way he had lived it. Steady, unshaken, present. Dana stared at her hands. Her lawyer whispered something she didn't hear. Then the testimonies began. Officer Carla Webb stepped forward first. She described the night Dana threatened her career for asking a question about a report. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, as though reopening a door she had closed years earlier. People in the room leaned forward without meaning to. Next came a college student named Malik. He explained a traffic stop that left him shaken for days. His voice wavered as he described how Dana had pulled him from his car for no clear reason. He had tried not to remember it. He had tried to assume he overreacted, but seeing the video made everything make sense in a way he never wanted it to. A mother stepped up next. She spoke of her son who had been questioned aggressively outside a corner store. She said her family stayed quiet back then because they feared making things worse. She said she wasn't staying quiet anymore. The stories kept coming. They formed a pattern clearer than any chart or report. A pattern of force where none was needed. A pattern of intimidation where calm would have worked. A pattern of decisions made with the certainty of someone who never believed she would be challenged. Throughout all of this, Dana barely moved. The confidence she once wore like armor now felt cracked and flimsy. Her breaths were shallow, her eyes unfocused. Every new testimony chipped away at the version of herself she had clung to for so long. Then they called the next name, Judge Marcus Reed. He rose slowly and walked toward the front without a single wasted movement. The hall quieted in a way that wasn't commanded, only felt. He stood behind the microphone and rested his hands lightly on the sides of the podium. He didn't bring notes. He didn't adjust his suit. He simply stood and waited for the room to settle. "I don't intend to repeat what you all saw in the video," he began with a steady voice. "The footage speaks clearly on its own." His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It carried something deeper, something that made the room lean into the silence between his sentences. "What matters to me is not the slap itself," he said. "What matters is the reflex behind it. Because reflex tells the truth in a way rehearsed words never can." A few people exhaled softly. Others nodded. "I've spent my entire career watching how systems protect certain behaviors and punish others. And I have learned that the moments we ignore are the ones that eventually cost us the most." He paused, not for effect, but because the weight of his next words deserved space. "This is not about anger. This is not about vengeance. This is about the trust people place in those who wear a badge. Trust that was broken long before it reached my courtroom." He turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Dana's eyes without turning his body. "I did not want to destroy anyone's life," he said. "I want integrity to mean something again." Then he stepped back from the microphone and returned to his seat. No applause followed. No whispers. The silence was full, heavy, a silence that did not accuse, yet revealed everything. Dana's lawyer offered a short defense afterward. It relied on protocols and technicalities, but no one in the room seemed moved by it. The arguments felt thin compared to the mountain of lived experiences people had shared. The board recessed to make their decision. When they returned, the air felt sharper. Chairperson Carter read the findings in a clear, unwavering voice. Officer Dana Holt would be removed from duty permanently. Her certification revoked. Her conduct referred to the state attorney for further review. Dana stood motionless as the room emptied. People did not stare. They did not comment. They simply walked past her the way people walk past a picture that once hung on the wall but no longer mattered. Judge Reed rose from his seat and walked toward the exit without looking in her direction. Not out of cruelty, not out of triumph, simply because the moment no longer revolved around her. He had witnessed what he needed to witness. The truth had spoken for itself, and there was nothing else to add. Part 5 will carry the story into the aftermath, the deeper community shift, the changes sparked by the hearing, the quiet transformation inside the county, and the final message that ties everything together with emotional clarity and lasting impact. Began in quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that follows after a storm has carried away everything loose enough to move. The hearing was over. The decision was final. For the first time in more than a decade, Dana Holt walked out of the government building without the badge she once believed defined her. She stepped into the parking lot as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. A few reporters called her name, but their voices felt distant. She didn't answer. She opened the passenger door of her attorney's car and sat down with a heaviness that made the air in the vehicle feel crowded. Paul started the engine, but didn't speak. He understood there was nothing he could say that would land in a place where it mattered. Dana stared ahead, her hands resting in her lap. She had imagined many endings to her career over the years. Retirement, promotion, transfer, even scandals she assumed she could talk her way out of. But she never imagined this. A complete unraveling. Not one loud moment, but thousands of small truths woven together. A tapestry she could no longer tear apart. When she arrived home, she closed the door behind her and let the silence rush in. No scanners humming. No radio crackling. No boots thudding across station floors. Only the weight of an identity stripped away. She removed her coat and hung it on the same hook she had used every night for years. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the badge she had been ordered to surrender before leaving the hearing. She held it in her palm. It didn't feel like authority anymore. It didn't feel like honor or duty. It felt like a story she had told herself until it became a myth. one she believed more fiercely than anyone else ever had. She placed down the kitchen counter and stepped away. Across the county, the hall where the hearing had been held was already being rearranged for a community workshop later that evening. Chairs stacked, tables folded, but something lingered in the air. Something that didn't fade when the sound equipment was packed up. People who had attended the hearing walked out with conversations already forming. Not about vengeance, not about humiliation, but about what should come next. Some stopped in the hallway, discussing reforms that had been ignored for too long. Others gathered outside to talk about training, oversight, and the kinds of changes that could reshape how their community interacted with law enforcement. They spoke with a mix of hope and caution, knowing one hearing cannot fix an entire system, but can spark the beginning of something different. Meanwhile, Judge Marcus Reed returned to his chambers with the same quiet steps he always used. His clerk Daniel followed behind him, carrying a handful of documents. Daniel waited for the judge to sit before speaking. "You think this will actually push change?" he asked. Reed looked up, his expression steady. "I think it already has," he replied. "People saw something they can't unsee. And once that happens, silence no longer feels acceptable." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning behind those words. For years, he had watched Reed work with patients that often went unrecognized. Today, he understood it more clearly than ever. The judge returned to his docket. Cases that had nothing to do with the hearing still needed attention. People still waited for rulings, decisions, and the fairness he always offered. Nothing about his responsibilities changed, but something inside him settled with a deeper sense of purpose. He had known countless moments of disrespect throughout his career. He had witnessed prejudice raised like a shield, but he also knew that dignity could break barriers arrogance could never withstand. In the days that followed, the county took steps many thought unlikely. Training programs were updated with input from educators, community members, and civil rights groups. A committee was formed to review officer conduct more transparently. Old case files were reopened to ensure no pattern of abuse had been overlooked. Not all changes happened quickly. Not all were perfect, but they were real. And for a county that had been stuck for years, real mattered. People who once hesitated to speak came forward with more confidence. Rideshare drivers, teachers, parents, small business owners. They shared their experiences not with bitterness, but with a desire for things to improve. And they discovered others felt the same. Voices that had been scattered for years now found connection. As for Dana Holt, the world around her grew smaller. She sold her house quietly, avoiding attention. Her daughter Mia visited once. Their conversation was short, walking the line between awkward and painful. They didn't argue. They didn't reconcile. They simply shared a space where both of them knew their relationship had been shaped by years of distance neither had addressed. Dana eventually moved 3 counties away, taking a job in private security at a distribution center. Her name faded from headlines and comment threads. People stopped debating her actions and moved on to new issues, new stories, new demands for accountability. She lived in a small apartment near an industrial district where trucks rumbled past every morning. No one in the area recognized her. No one asked questions. And for the first time in her adult life, she walked into rooms unnoticed. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't redemption. It was the quiet life she had never imagined for herself, far removed from the power she once wielded so casually. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, life continued with a new undercurrent. Attorneys treated clients with a little more care. Bailiffs updated procedures. Officers started attending meetings they once avoided. Not because a judge had demanded anything. Not because the county had issued strict orders. But because the truth they witnessed had reshaped how they understood their roles. One morning after a juvenile hearing, a young public defender approached Judge Reed. She waited until he finished signing a document before speaking. "Can I ask something?" she said. He nodded. "How did you stay calm that day?" she asked softly. He looked at her with a small, thoughtful smile. "I didn't want to give her what she expected," he said. "Sometimes the strongest answer is the one that isn't loud." She absorbed the words, knowing they would stay with her long after she walked away. As weeks turned to months, the story of the slap became less about the strike and more about what followed. Not everyone remembered the exact details. Not everyone remembered the date, but they remembered the shift. They remembered the feeling that a line had finally been drawn. They remembered that accountability didn't arrive with violence, but with quiet truth and a community willing to face itself. In the end, it wasn't a dramatic downfall or a triumphant victory. It was something more grounded and more honest. The collapse of a false identity, the rise of a long overdue conversation, and the realization that justice does not need to shout to be heard. The county carried the lesson forward. Power without limits becomes danger. Silence can hold harm, and dignity, when defended, can change more than a single courtroom. It can change the culture that surrounds it. That was the legacy of the moment when Officer Dana Holt struck the wrong man. Not the slap itself, but the truth that followed. A truth strong enough to transform an entire community, one voice at a time.